back again. We're going to do round two. I'm going to let Dr. Andrews talk to you about some of the flint knapping tools. Can't see them on the ground here. We'll kind of hold them up and he can talk about them a little bit. It's really pretty neat. You outdoorsy guys are going to love this part for sure.
So when you're knapping and you have a raw piece of stone, so something that looks, you know, like this, it's chunky, it's kind of ugly, and you got to turn it into something that's usable, something that's got a sharp edge that you can, you know, potentially hunt with. You can put it on a foreshaft and make arrows or spears out of it. You can scrape hides with it. You can cut meat, those sorts of things. So you need certain types of tools in order to do that. Prehistorically, people used two main types of materials to do that. They used other rocks as hammers, and so I've got a variety of those I'll show you. And then they used antler. And then modern knappers and knappers starting in the historic period, because people still made stone tools, you know, up until probably the mid 1800s or so here in the United States. And notably there are people who still use stone tools in some areas of the world. It makes excellent hide scraping and hide cleaning tools. So, but there are a variety of types of tools. Modern people use copper and metal and other things like that. So I've got a few of those I'll show you as well. So generally, what you start with when you're knapping is going to be a hard hammer. The key is to find a piece of stone. And Mr. Bennett's going to show you one close up there. Find a piece of stone that is harder than the rock that you're knapping. And if you watched our previous video, you'll know that you have to have high silica content in the stone that you're going to make a stone tool out of. You need rock that's harder and doesn't break as easily, basically. And for the most part, that's things like granite. Granite makes a really good hammer stone. So that piece right there is a piece of granite. Most of my hammer stones are granite of one form or another, so they're a lot harder. They don't break as easily. Occasionally you'll see this one right here, it's broken a few times from use. So hammer stones will last you, depending on how much you nap, they'll last you for a few weeks, basically, if you're napping every day. And prehistoric people, they had to nap every day. That's how they made that's how they made their tools. That's how they their livelihood depended on it. So they'll use these pretty, they'll go through them pretty quickly. So finding a good source of hammer stones is almost as important as finding a good source of silica-rich rock to make your stone tools with.
What is this red one?
That is, so this is a hematitic type of stone. It's got a lot of iron in it.
Okay.
I feel it's pretty heavy for its size. And generally when you find rocks that have that red tint, that means they've got a lot of iron in them.
I have one of these in my classroom. I wasn't sure what it was.
Okay. Yeah, so those are generally, if you find redness like that, it looks like rust basically, and that's what happens is you get iron rich, and iron's great for hammer stones. It makes them heavy. You want them to be relatively heavy for their size, because when you're knapping, which we'll do in our next video, one of the things we'll see is that it's important to let the hammer do the work. You're not pounding on things as hard as you can. You're letting you just want a light hold on it. You want the hammer to do the work. So it's just, you want heavy hammer stones, basically, is what you're looking for. So I have a variety of those. This piece right here, this is a piece of quartz. Quartz is really hard, so I'll use quartz sometimes for hammer stones as well.
You guys have seen some quartz.
So nice little piece. I like to have a variety of sizes. So I've got some really big ones. So if you need to take off. If you're reducing a really big piece of rock, you need a big, heavy hammer stone. For finer work, you want these smaller sorts of hammer stones. I like to keep these thin rocks like this in my knapping kit. So you'll see how that's a really thin one. It allows you to do really precise work. So it's good to have if you're putting together a knapping kit, it's good to have a variety of types of hammer stones in it.
Guys, you have enough time on your hands right now. You got to be lined out. You guys be roaming the riverbeds and getting together your knapping kit.
Hey, you need to know how to make stone tools in case zombie apocalypse comes or something.
Could be. We'll be ready to go.
All right. So once you've like started the reduction process, so you've started making your stone tool and you've gotten off kind of the big pieces. Hammer stones are good for kind of taking off the big chunks that you need to get down. once you get down to a smaller form and you're ready to start shaping it into whatever tool that you want, then generally you're going to move to an antler hammer. Prehistoric people used antler for this. So antler, and I have a variety of antler billets here, and billet is the term that archaeologists tend to use and flint knappers use. It means hammer, essentially.
Billet?
So these are what we call antler billets, and so I've got some elk. So that's an elk billet right there.
Okay.
I've got, I think that one might be elk as well. These two are whitetail, so you have a different variety of sizes of antler billets. So you can see that up close. You got to shape them. You want a nice kind of round head to your antler hammer. Antler is obviously a lot softer than stone hammers. So when you hit the edge of a piece with antler, what happens is that sharp edge kind of cuts in to your antler, and the antler wraps around it, and it's almost like it's peeling off flakes on the underside. So if I were to hit this piece right here, and I were to hit it on the edge just like that, that would cut into that antler. And you can see, if you look closely, there's little marks all over the antler hammer here, where it's cut in, and it's basically like peeling off a flake. Essentially, it peels off a piece on that underside, and we'll show you how that works here in a few. So antlers are good for kind of refining the shape. Once you've used your hard hammer to get it down to a relatively small shape, similar to what your final product intention is, then you move to an antler hammer. And again, the size of the antler hammer, is dependent upon the size that you're working on. So a big one like this is going to take off kind of bigger and thicker flakes than a small one like this. So if I'm working on like a final piece, I may want to use a small antler hammer. So it's a good idea to have, again, a variety of billet sizes in your flint knapping kit. At least two, I'd say a big one and a small one for antler hammers. So once we get down to that final shape, so for example, this piece I showed you in an earlier video, this is a obsidian piece right here. This was made with a combination of hard hammers, starting from a big chunk, and then using antler hammers to get down to this size right here. So once you get it roughly in the shape you need, then you move from actually hitting the piece, so using force and hitting it like a hammer, to using pressure to pull off your flakes and to shape it. So pressure flaking involves prehistorically using the tip of an antler like this. And so the way you pressure flake, and we'll share this in a little more detail later, is you're basically putting your edge of your antler tip against the edge of your piece, and you're pushing it off. So pressure flakers are used for kind of finalizing the shape. So if you're making an arrowhead to put on an arrow shaft, or a spearhead to put on a spear shaft, you're going to use the tip, you're going to use pressure to push off those flakes to do that final shaping. Modern knappers and kind of late prehistoric knappers into the modern era used copper a lot for that. And so here's a copper flaker that I made.
That looks homemade.
It does. This is homemade. It's basically a copper nail, and you can get a copper nail at any hardware store, and you just drill a piece into a dowel rod and put your copper nail in there. I've wrapped this one because I like to have a good firm grip, and it's kind of padded. I got a rag wrapped with duct tape here, and you can use that. Copper, if you're a beginning napper, copper is a lot more forgiving than antler. It's easier than antler. You can also make hammers. So this is basically the equivalent. This is a copper called a copper bopper. It's a weighted copper top. It's got lead in there, so it's heavy on the end. You can feel that.
That is heavy.
And that's the equivalent of a antler billet, about like that.
Okay.
So you can get those. People make them and sell them. So there's a number of kind of online flint knapping stores you can get those from. But they're useful. And again, if you're a beginner, copper is a lot more forgiving. It's soft. It's a soft metal, so it works similar, to the way an antler works, in that it digs in to your rock and helps you kind of peel those flakes off. So it's a good, we'll do some demonstrations with working with this as well. All right, so now one other tool that you'll need, and I forgot to mention this as we were going, two other tools actually. If you're gonna flint knap on your own, you need protection. First off, always wear eye protection.
That's right.
Prehistoric people probably didn't do that, but you do not want a piece of obsidian or flint or chert in your eyeball, because it will cut you and cause you to go blind. So so always wear eye protection. Gloves, a lot of people wear gloves. Flint knapping will cut you. The flakes that you produce are extremely sharp. So until you're really experienced at it and you know how to handle the pieces you're working, it's a good idea to wear gloves. You want to
talking about me then.
I'm
I've
talking
got
about
gloves.
Mr. Bennett. He's inexperienced. He needs to wear gloves. You want a good pad for your leg. I've got a piece of tan deer hide here that I use as a pad for my leg. But when you're napping, you will frequently do it on your leg like this, and when you come down, you'll hit your leg. And if you're doing that on your bare leg, it hurts after a while. So you want a good leather pad. That's also important for pressure flaking. So when you're pressure flaking something, you're using your antler tip, you're doing it like this. If you don't have a piece of leather between your fingers and the stone, you're gonna drive those flakes into your hand. You can cut a tendon, you can cut it's not good. You want to protect yourself when you're doing this, because the flakes, the stuff you produce is really, really sharp. So the other type of tool that you need is a rough piece of stone. So this right here, and I'll let you show that up close.
That out?
Yeah, that's an abrader stone.
Raider?
So one of the things, especially in like kind of late stage napping, where you're shaping your piece, you need to dull the edges that you're flaking. So especially on a piece like obsidian, it's really brittle, so it'll break really easily. So if you're pushing on the edge, or if you're hitting the edge, you don't want it to crumble like that. So you want to get rid of all those weak pieces, basically. So the way you do that is using an abrader stone. So a rough stone, sandstone, works really good for this, and my abraders are all local sandstone that I picked up. You're basically just rubbing your edges, and what that does is it dulls that edge, and it makes, when you hit it or when you pressure flake it, it lets all that force go into the rock rather than just crumbling those weak edges. So abrading is, I think, probably one of the most underrated parts of flint knapping. The best flint knappers in the world, if you watch them, and you should go on YouTube and search flint knapping, you can find some really good flint knappers. They always abrade their edges without exception. Before any strike, before any pressure flake, they're abrading their edges every single time. It's critically important to do that. Okay. So, and you'll see that when we nap in our next video. All right, so those are the tools that you need.